How's that for a wonderful way to start off a presentation that's called Sobriety Doesn't Have to Suck? I'm going to tell you before we get started here and other people join us the backstory on that song that we just listened to, Chop Wood, Carry Water. I wrote that song when I was like 2 or 3 months sober. That was in 1988. I was an impaired drug treatment professional. I had just gotten out of rehab after relapsing as a drug counselor. And so I couldn't work in my chosen field. And so I'm a musician. That's the other thing I could do. And I thought, well, maybe I'll do something with music in recovery. And I got this idea to write a rock musical that told my story about addiction and recovery. And that song that we just listened to, Chop Wood, Carry Water, was one of the songs that I wrote at that time. And it turned out to be the rousing closing anthem for this rock musical that I wrote. I ended up calling it The Journey. I ended up turning that into an entire treatment curriculum. I ended up using it as a teaching tool, this rock musical production that for years I ran a treatment program, and we would actually do stage productions of this musical with kids. It was an adolescent program, and so it was teenagers in drug treatment, and they'd be acting out their own stories of addiction and recovery through this musical that I wrote. And the song that we just listened to, Chop Wood, Carry Water, is, like I said, the rousing closing anthem. I'm going to pull up my slides here. Let's see what happens here. And this picture here, at the end of the show, this song would be playing, what we just listened to. And when I came on here and I was doing all the singing along with it, that was the end of the show, and these kids would be taking their bows at the end of the play. They'd just done this 2-hour performance that was heart-wrenching and funny and meaningful, and the audience is on their feet at this time giving a standing ovation. And it's Chop Wood, Carry Water. And like I say, it's this big recovery celebration thing. And I realized this is such an appropriate way to start this presentation on Sobriety Doesn't Suck, because, you can't see their faces there in that picture. But as soon as they stand up and you could see their faces, every one of those kids' faces are beaming. There is so much self-esteem going on with those kids at that time, and this is their treatment center. They were all in treatment there, and this is the definition of sobriety doesn't suck. They were so filled with the good feeling that sobriety can bring, and this play production happened to be this way that we would be able to present that to others, and they got the self-esteem from doing it, and it was part of carrying the message. So as you can see, it's a really appropriate beginning for my presentation here today, because the purpose of my work with Sobriety Doesn't Suck is to, acknowledge that, most people, when they begin recovery, it looks, if we're going to be honest here, like this might suck. And a lot of people aren't very happy about having to give up something that's been working for them for a long time and they've been using to make them feel good. And so this whole purpose of this talk today is, how do we get from this sort of sucks, to a good place? So I thought that was a fun way to get us started here. I'll take a second here just to introduce myself. I appreciate you so much for being here. If we haven't had the chance to meet, I don't know who all is here yet. Drop your name in the chat to give me a little bit of idea who I'm talking to. But if I haven't had the chance to meet you, and I probably haven't, my name is Jim Savage. I'm a licensed drug and alcohol counselor. I've been working in the addiction treatment field for over 30 years. One of the most significant periods of my career was I ran, and like I said, this adolescent treatment program in the Dallas, Texas area. And now I live in Connecticut. I'm in private practice, and I do both individual recovery support, and I also specialize in working with families. I have a very comprehensive, specialized online education program for families. I work especially with parents of teens and young adults. And so I do everything virtually. I'll tell you a little bit more and give you links for information about what I do at the end of our presentation. But what we're talking about today is I'm going to focus on when earlier this year I decided to write this quick little ebook, and it's sort of a summary of my experience of over 30 years of helping treatment clients not just get dry because you have to, but to achieve that kind of recovery that makes you feel good about yourself. And as we just saw in that scene of young kids in treatment taking bows, feeling very excited about recovery, I sort of this little ebook that I wrote is a synopsis of, I sort of put together my thoughts in a very concise, sort of not in-depth, just overview of the particular elements that some of the perspectives and insights I've gained over the years of what works in being able to accomplish that. And so the book, and what I'm talking today about is I'm just going to follow the book to show some of the key areas that are important to address to help make this happen. I will also give you a link. This is a free ebook. You can download it. I'll give you a link at the end of the presentation so you can grab a copy of the ebook. But so again, the purpose of the book, as I said, it's not uncommon for people when they're first considering sobriety. How about the January 29th? Dry January is almost over, right? And there's a lot of people out there who maybe are doing that dry January thing. They're thinking about sobriety. Maybe people who are struggling with sobriety, trying to stay sober. Or another thing that is really dear to my heart is working with people who've been maybe sober for a while, but you feel like something's missing, or you're looking for the spark to enrich and take your recovery to another level. That's sort of what I do in my individual coaching. And again, all of that's sort of encompassed in this short, it's like about a 35 page read, Sobriety Doesn't Suck. And so to get started here on, I'm going to tell you a story. When I first started working on the book, I had a session with a client one day, and I had the cover designed, I had the title, and I don't know if I'd even written the manuscript yet for this, but I was doing a session with a client, and at the end of the session, I said, hey, I want you to take a look at something for me. Give me some feedback. And I go back to this. I put the title on there, and I said, what comes to mind when you read that? Sobriety Doesn't Suck. And he looked at it for a second, and he laughed, and he said, well, I can tell you that first month or two, that's exactly how it was for me. It sucked. And he reminded me of when he used to come into sessions crying or lighting his hair on fire, and things were a disaster and things were miserable and he was struggling. And then I pointed out to him, we had just done a session. I said, we just spent the last hour talking about things you were demonstrating that you are very fired up, you are inspired, you are excited about recovery. And a couple of months earlier, he was miserable. And so I pointed out what this book is going to do, we're going to talk about how do you get from point A to point B. He was miserable, but now he was clearly demonstrating he was inspired and excited about recovery. And it was sort of like tapping the brakes, and I had to point out, you know what we've been doing these last couple of months, my modus operandi about the sort of things we've been focusing on in the counseling was to help move him from that place. And then he ended up saying, "Wow." I think a week or two later, I wrote the book, and we read some of it, and he really liked it, and I was pleasantly surprised to see his response to that. But part of what he said is, "Man, this is motivating just reading this book," but because what it was doing was it was sort of helping him identify what he had been doing or is in the process of doing and seeing, oh, this is working. And yes, I see the end result is it's making me excited and fired up about sobriety. And so the point that one of the first points that I want to make is that this is from point A to point B is actually a pretty big shift. How does somebody go from this sucks to this is awesome? And I'll go so far as to use the term it's a transformation. We're literally becoming a different person. It's not uncommon around recovery circles. People that get into recovery, will frequently use things to describe that as I feel like a new person. And this word transformation, it's probably my favorite word. It's the word that resonates the most with me. I love the idea of transformation, and I like to use that in terms of my intentions when I'm working with clients. I think that that's what helping someone get into sobriety is about, facilitating a transformation. As I said earlier, not just staying dry. If it was just about staying dry, we could treat someone with a roll of duct tape. Wrap up every orifice in the body so that no chemical can be ingested and that person can stay dry. But obviously, that sort of helps us recognize the difference between the transformation that takes place so that we get to that place of those kids, feeling fulfilled and excited and inspired about recovery. That's a transformation. And so, again, the rest of this talk, I'm going to touch on a couple areas that I've identified in sort of analyzing, how I've approached this for, as I say, over 30 years, and what the key points are. Some of the trouble areas that we have to address or pay attention to. So to begin this, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I mentioned at the beginning that the whole reason I wrote that song is I relapsed after I had started working as a drug counselor in 1988. I ended up in treatment again, and that was not a fun experience. I would not recommend that, being a drug counselor in drug treatment. And the thing that happened is dark. It was bad. I created a public scandal and going to treatment, and I even went to treatment. They had an intervention with me, and they sent me to treatment, and they sent me to the same treatment center where I had sent a 19-year-old kid to treatment 2 weeks earlier. He was still a patient in this treatment center, and when I showed up, he thought I was there to visit him. And he slowly looked down and he saw the wristband on my arm and realized I was a patient. And he proceeded to make my life miserable for the next couple of weeks. And as I said, it was a very painful, very dark period in my life. I will also say it was a life-changing event. I'm grateful for what happened. And in particular, what it allowed me to get a perspective on what was missing in my recovery the first time around. And in short, I will say it was the spirituality piece. Well, I went to treatment and I got sort of lit up spiritually. I went to Arizona and I connected with the alternative spiritual guy, the guy that came in and brought the drums and meditate and we'd do sand paintings and he'd take us for walks out in the desert and we'd look for little special objects and feathers and things. And I'd never paid attention to spirituality before that, was not a spiritual guy. Something clicked for me and I got really lit up on that and I got excited. I have lots of other material on my YouTube channel and articles on my Substack about that particular time, and I'm not going to go into that right now. My point here is saying when I came back from treatment, I, one, had to reestablish my own recovery, and I didn't have any business even going near working in the treatment field. And so I dove in and I was committed to recovery this time, and I did not want to stray from that. And I wanted to be disciplined and committed to working my own recovery program. But I was also studying a lot of other things besides the basic recovery literature. I was studying spiritual traditions and getting trained in different traditions. But as far as like the basic recovery stuff, I was starting to notice things in, for instance, the AA literature, in the big book. There's a line in there that says, if you can relate to our description of alcoholism, you may be suffering from an experience, you may be suffering from an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. And I read that and I thought, whoa, that's a pretty bold statement. Only a spiritual experience will conquer. And for one, I'd been already working in the drug treatment field. I hadn't been working a very serious program. I hadn't paid attention to that line, and that got my attention. And I thought, it's not saying you're suffering from an illness that the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are going to conquer, or it doesn't say that completing drug treatment is going to conquer, or it doesn't say that the right medication is going to conquer. It says the solution to this condition is a spiritual experience. I was like, what the heck is that? As I say, it's sort of a bold statement. But then I was reading an article, interview with Bill Wilson, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he described the recovery process as ego deflation at depth, followed by a spiritual experience. And I started paying attention to that, and one, it hit me hard because it made me uncomfortable, because I saw that as that's a 50-50 proposition, 2 parts, ego deflation at depth, followed by a spiritual experience. And I realized that so far in my young career, my experience so far in the treatment programs that I'd worked at, I thought, we do a really good job on the ego deflation at depth part, but I'm not so sure how good a job we do on the spiritual experience part. We were good at, reading lists to clients to make them feel bad and bring the families in and have them read lists, and we make them wear signs. I had to wear a sign in treatment that, was about some kind, I couldn't talk, and the sign around my neck said nonverbal. And again, we were good, I thought, at the ego deflation at depth part, but the hospital I worked at, this is in the 80s, my first job, at a nationally renowned treatment center. The extent of the spiritual program was a 1-hour-a-week group where the hospital chaplain came in, and we called it Rap with the Chap. And I'm not so sure how effective that was in creating this spiritual experience that we're saying is going to be the solution to this condition. And because it was what was going on with me at the time, I was lit up spiritually, I started thinking, you know what? I'm going to leave the ego deflation at depth part to the others, and I'm going to, if and when I get back into working in the field, I'm just going to focus on the spiritual experience part. And I'll say this to make this really simply. This is sort of archaic kind of language. Ego deflation at depth followed by spiritual experience. To me, that reads, ego deflation at depth feels bad. Spiritual experience feels good. The recovery process is after some period of feeling bad, there's supposed to be a period of feeling good. And that's the thing, again, this whole presentation today is about is the feeling good part. What my work with Sobriety Doesn't Suck, it's about acknowledging, of course you're going to feel bad giving up something that's been making you feel good. And what I've watched is lots of clients, are miserable because they don't have anything to replace it with. And again, I made it my intention to try to create situations that had the intention to give them something that would feel good. Now, obviously, here's an important point that we've got to discuss. I'm talking about spiritual experience. Around recovery circles, mention the word spirituality, and that can become a lightning rod for opinions and attitudes, and in a lot of cases, it becomes a barrier. There's a lot of people who, and it's fine, it's understandable. I don't want to hear talk about God. I don't want to hear, I get uncomfortable about this. The second you start talking about religion or spiritual, I don't want to hear any of that. And at the same time, I'm recognizing this spiritual component of recovery seems to be really important. And so one of the things that I'll share with you today is over the years, it's took me a long time to hone my spiel about talking about spirituality, and in particular, the first thing, the most tangible thing is if we take a little time to unpack exactly what is meant by using the term spiritual or spirituality or spiritual experience around recovery circles, it can go a long way in removing some of those barriers. But again, you mentioned the word, especially AA or the 12-step recovery. Yes, the word God is in the big book, and that can be a real turnoff to a lot of people. And what I was recognizing is, it's too bad that it has to be that way, because really when you unpack it, you come to understand spiritual doesn't have to have anything to do with God, and just taking a little bit of time to have that conversation. One of the things I will point you to, I do a lot of work. I have a couple videos on my YouTube channel. I've got an article on my Substack that's called, Why Do They Call Alcohol Spirits Anyway? And all these, I've got several videos on, like I say, on my YouTube channel about Carl Jung's perspective on the relationship between alcohol and really what I think that he meant was referring to as addiction in general, but he was using alcohol. He was talking about the relationship between alcohol and man's desire for spiritual connection. And there's some fascinating stuff in there. I'm not going to take the time to go into that right now. You can find that on my other material. But read that when I have that conversation, that takes a lot of the barrier out of this sort of immediate wall that goes up for people defensive about the spiritual or religious. And again, that can go a long way. I had another session with a client just last week, and we read a section out of the Sobriety Doesn't Suck. And the same thing as with that first client that I was talking about. 10 months ago, this guy, when he came to me, he was definitely agnostic or atheist. It wanted nothing to do with spirituality. And 10 months later, 9 months later, he's still sober, he's doing well. And we read this sort of review about what he'd been doing, what motivated him or is motivating him for recovery. And again, the same thing that happened with that first client. He said by just reviewing what was motivating him, he literally said this, is make him more motivated. He ended up saying, when I always ask him at the end of my sessions, what's the best thing you got today out of our session? He literally said, this session was sort of like a spiritual experience for me. Because just by putting a focus on what he was doing to make this shift. So again, I think that it's important. I'm very sensitive to the folks that are, uncomfortable about the talk about religion or spirituality around recovery, and I make the extra effort to try to effectively unpack that. I will say this in the book. I suggest my definition of spirituality is my relationship with myself as well as my relationship with the rest of creation. And so that my relationship with myself, that implies self-examination. To me, spirituality is about looking at myself. And some of the challenges about that is, okay, am I going to be honest in my self-examination? Am I being honest about my relationship with myself? And, and you can see that can start, okay, I'm sort of, if I'm being honest, I'm sort of slacking off on this part of whether my program or, how I'm conducting myself. And if I feel guilty or if I feel a little shame about that, starting to process that kind of stuff can start to open the door to what you could see. Well, this is spiritual work. I'm looking at my relationship with myself, and then you add that into, and where do I fit in the rest of creation? To me, that's what I've experienced helping lots of clients sort of open the door. So talk of spirituality is not nearly as threatening. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the work that I've been doing for 30 years. Though one of the very first times I did a group after returning to the field, I didn't know what I was doing. I set up a room that looked just like this picture. This picture was taken years after that, but I put a blanket down on the floor. I put some feathers in a circle. I put some candles out. And again, I had no idea why I was doing it, but when the clients came in and they sat down and they just said, and they got quiet and we sat, and I said, okay, so what does it feel like sitting here? And I remember, the first one said, it feels really calm, feels serene. And then one client said, it feels spiritual. And I realized right there, if my intention getting back into the field was going to be to help clients develop spiritually, I learned in psychology a really long time ago, set and setting is psychology 101. Set and setting is half the battle. Create an environment that helps them feel spiritual, you're halfway there. And it's sort of like, okay, this makes sense. And you could say, I've been sitting on the floor ever since. That was how I ran treatment groups for 30 years. Sitting on the floor like that, taking some risks at, looking like, okay, he's the weird guy that sits on the floor in the candlelight and with the feathers and stuff. And I got sort of this mumbo jumbo stuff going on. I was taking the risk to follow my truth because I knew the fruits that this could bring if effectively delivered and facilitated. And I worked really hard at that. And again, I had a lot of success, or I should say, it's been very effective in helping a lot of clients have that experience. All those kids that you saw on the stage at the beginning of here, that stage was in my treatment center. This group room was right in front of that stage. And so they were either on that stage doing those productions or they were sitting doing meditations and drumming around the circle on the floor in front of that stage. But let me share one specific example of, it's illustrative of what would happen there a lot. We would usually begin our groups doing some sort of meditation. Either everybody would drum, or sometimes I'd have them lay on the floor and I would drum and do sort of a guided imagery thing with them. And sometimes I'd walk around them. I'd have them lay on their back and I'd drum over them and let them feel the vibrations of the drum going through their body. And I can remember one time in particular, but this happened lots of times over the years. We come out of it and I'd say, okay, what was that like for you? We'd process a little bit. And I can remember one kid, he'd come out of it And he had this big grin on his face. He goes, wow, that was like, that was like being high, only it was pure. And he didn't realize the conversation that this was a kid. I mean, he was brand new to treatment. He'd only been there once or twice. And so this is all sort of whoa. And he was probably still high. He hadn't detoxed yet. And he comes out of it. That was like being high, but it was pure. And he didn't realize that over the next 2 months, he was going to dive deep into this exploring, what's going on with our drug use. And what he said was actually prophetic, because there's a book I refer to a lot called The Natural Mind, written by a guy named Andrew Weil. And in The Natural Mind, Andrew Weil says that man has an innate tendency to alter consciousness. And we learn that from a young age. We have a natural desire to want to change how we feel. And think about it. When little kids discover that if you spin around in circles, you get dizzy. And when you get dizzy, that's sort of this weird mystical experience. What is it? Why all of a sudden is my body moving? I fall down and even look at my face when I'm describing that. If you think about if a little kid gets dizzy and they they fall around, what's their typical reaction? Do they laugh, smile, or do they cry and frown? They typically will laugh. Oh, isn't this weird? Oh, what is this? I'm dizzy. It's a fun sort of thing. And then, some of us, when we got a little bit older, we learned how to play the pass out game, hyperventilate, and then you fall, bam, and you pass out. And as a budding addict at that time, bad pun, that was before I started doing drugs, but I was very intrigued by that mystical experience of waking out from passing out and the buzz and all that kind of thing. And then it's just a natural progression. Next level up is drugs and alcohol. It's going on all around us, and they work really well to change how we feel, right? But Andrew Weil's position is that that's just one step of the ladder. You can continue to go up into more advanced ways of altering consciousness. And the point being that with every level that you go up, the more pure the form, the more dedication and respect to the process and the education, understanding what it is that you're doing, how it is that you're doing this, the more pure that's going to be. That kid who said this was like being high, only it was different, it was pure, he didn't realize. I hadn't read that to him, and we hadn't talked about the word pure, but he identified it without knowing that. He said he felt the difference between the drug-induced change of how we feel and as Weil says, meditation and spiritual practices are another level up. A lot of people obviously get stuck at that drug and alcohol level. And so that's another way that you could describe my intentions of the work that I've been doing with treatment clients, is to help us move past that being stuck at the drug and alcohol level for changing how we feel. And another way that Andrew Weil model of moving up the rungs, a sort of a simple way or a tangible way to describe this, I found, is making the distinction between going outside ourselves to change how we feel or looking within, going within to change how we feel. I have written in one of my books the statement, anytime I go outside myself for something that's supposed to come from within, I cut myself off from my spiritual source. Now, spiritual source. I wrote that in the book that's the companion workbook to that musical production that we started off with. I wrote that years ago, and I have that in the book. These days, I tend to say, when I cut myself off from my authentic self, and I will say, candid, full transparency, I'll use that word authentic self specifically if I'm having a sort of random mention that, well, when you go out, if I put this on a post somewhere on social media, if I go outside myself for something that's supposed to come from within, and I say I cut myself off from my spiritual source, there's a lot of people that right there will say, that's BS, and there is no such thing as a spiritual source. And when I don't have the time to explain, to unpack that spiritual stuff, I've found that I'll use the term my authentic self. That's not near as lightning rod term. There's more openness to that. It doesn't have a spiritual connotation necessarily, even though if we talked about it for a while, I would get to the point of saying my authentic self sort of does line up in the same thing as my spiritual connection. Again, takes a little while to have conversations about that. But anytime I go outside myself for something that's supposed to come from within, and that's one of the things that I point out with the clients that I work with, is that this good feeling from within is a much more powerful motivator for recovery. And again, when we get stuck at that drug and alcohol, and there's some wild experiences that we're getting, and the ideas like self-esteem as a good feeling, that doesn't sound quite as dramatic as an acid trip, right? But I like to be able to, sometimes I've been in positions where I say to somebody I'm working with, I've done a lot of acid in my day. I'm an old acid head, right? And I can tell you that I've had way more powerful experiences in ceremony than any acid trip that I'd ever had. Now, I'm doing set and setting. When I say that to a treatment client, I'm knowing they're going to be like, really? What could that be like? When I say I've had powerful experiences in ceremony, but then I say, you're wondering that. You're thinking like, is that like, if you beat the drum hard enough and burn enough sage, you're going to have some experience like 10 hits of acid or something? And I would say, you can't know what I'm talking about because you only have one thing to compare it to. You're comparing it to mood altering substances and what that does to you. And it's a whole different thing, and you can't put it into words until you experience it. And lots of times, when I've got clients in a group that have experienced that, they will affirm that. They'll say, oh yeah, he's not lying. I've had experiences like that too in ceremony. Stone cold sober, don't need the chemicals to get there. But again, it's something that you can't put into words until you've experienced it, but just putting that out there can be, for some people, intriguing that they want to try, okay, I want to experience something like that. And so let's see what we got next here. Another thing that I got into early on, in addition to the ceremonial stuff that I was doing, was storytelling. I listened to people who were talking about mythology and fairy tales and using that for psychological interpretation. And there are storytellers who'd play drums while they tell the stories. And I'm an imitator, and I picked up the drum and started doing storytelling. And one of the stories that I work with, Native American folktale called The Story of Jumping Mouse. And I'm not going to do tell you the whole story. The really cliff note version of it is a mouse gets inspired to go on a journey that leads to transformation. And along the way, it brings up issues of dealing with fears, confronting fears, perseverance, sacrifice, giving up things, dedication, commitment, and ultimately transformation. It leads to an experience of transformation. Now, Jumping Mouse is a powerful story. If I'm getting ready to do a master class on that, I'll tell you again, links. I'll give you links to my stuff at the end here. I have a Substack where I just did an article. That's called "The Glimpse of the Sacred Mountains." That's one part of the Jumping Mouse story, and it's gotten a lot of response on Substack, and people want to learn more about that. So I'm going to do some sort of workshop or master class on Jumping Mouse. And so go over to Substack and subscribe to me over there, and you can get on my list for getting messages if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. But in this article, The Glimpse of the Sacred Mountains, I just talked about the one scene from the Jumping Mouse story is when he jumps up and off in the distance he sees the sacred mountains. And it says, and it was like no sight he'd ever seen before, and it was like they reached into his heart and touched his soul, and by the time he came back down, his life had changed, because he knew that there was nothing else more worthwhile in life to do but to go to the sacred mountains. And that began the journey for Jumping Mouse that led to all these things of sacrifice and dealing with fears and all the things that we might experience going on our own journey of personal transformation. But over the years, as my work developed and I started sort of zooming out and describing what I was doing, I sort of would end up saying my whole intention in my work in drug treatment is to help people get a glimpse of the sacred mountains. It's that spark, helping to create a moment. Sometimes it's just a moment that something happens for somebody, it's an awesome moment, or it's a coincidence that gets your attention. Whoa, is there something more here? Or, wow, that felt really good, or that was awesome. That makes them want more of that. That kid that came out of the drum meditation, whoa, that was like being high, only it was pure. He wanted more of that. And that's what I've been doing with treatment clients, all these, creating these situations that get them to the point of wanting more from that. And to me, that's the spark. I use the term spark. How do we light a spark? How do we get that glimpse of the sacred mountains? That's what's going to motivate us for recovery. And in the book, I talk about carrot or stick for motivation for recovery. And the point there is, I learned a long time ago that as far as motivating for someone for recovery, it's probably forcing them into recovery by shaming and scaring someone is probably not going to be as effective as giving them a taste of some good stuff that makes them want to come back for more. So a carrot in front of the nose is probably going to be more effective for motivation than a boot in the ass, is sort of my philosophy here. And I've had a lot of experience of seeing that work, creating positive experiences, helping people feel good, and that becoming their motivation, getting fired up and wanting more of that. And so again, the Jumping Mouse story is real powerful. Check on my Substack if you'd like to learn more, because it just reading that article on the Substack, people have been writing comments saying, this inspires me. I want to go on my journey of transformation. And so it's that recurring theme here. Talking about motivating ends up being motivating in and of itself. Okay? And so let's see what we got next here. We're getting sort of towards the end of the book, and I'll start wrapping this up. I close Sobriety Doesn't Suck with tips for enriching, try to give you some practical stuff. What can we do to make this happen? And I start off by saying, spiritual experience. How do you order up one of those? I'm not sure that you can. There's no guarantee. How do you make someone have a spiritual experience? And I suggest in the book, I describe it like fishing, in that I think that the more time you spend with your hook in the water, the greater are your chances of catching a fish. And so my suggestions are, the more that you do things with intention to try to enrich your spiritual life or to and deepen your recovery, the greater the chances are of that happening for you. And so I just tried to come up with some general suggestions. What comes to top of my mind is say, okay, what are some tips you can give us? So the first thing is go back to that Andrew Weil statement about this rung above the step of drugs and alcohol, meditation or spiritual practices. There's a whole lot there. As far as, a lot of people that get into recovery, the word meditation's in one of the 12 steps. And a lot of people, I don't know how to meditate. I don't know how to meditate, but it's actually part of working a recovery program. And there's a whole lot to learn about meditation, to unpack that and make it easier. It doesn't have to be so complex, but taking the first steps to actually, doing something towards that, or whatever this term spiritual practice is, I just, suggest you explore, see if you find something that resonates with you. But that word ritual is an important word I use a lot, because ritual is doing something that creates a sacred space. It's stepping out of regular time, and it's in that ritual space where transformation occurs. We have ceremonies to facilitate transformation, right? Baptism ceremonies, funeral ceremonies, wedding ceremonies, graduation ceremonies. We do something, a little pomp and circumstance, that's ritual, right? And the ritual changes the space. And so I tell people sometimes you might have your morning ritual, read your daily reflection, your daily reading, what your meditation, and I'll say ritualize it. Light a candle while you read your morning meditation book. Light a piece of incense and maybe stare at the smoke for a second and watch the smoke as it goes from the incense to smoke and then disappears. And think for a second about, it went from solid to sort of half solid to disappearing, and see where your mind goes. Oh, guess what? You maybe just meditated, because a thought may have come to you about, that's neat, and and that's transformation or whatever. But it can begin with tiny little things. You can, take a walk outside and ritualize it just by, I'm going to pay attention to the leaves in the trees and see if I can feel their energy or something, like that. But so beginning to do some form of meditation or spiritual practices. Second one here, not to be Captain Obvious, but on this one, my definition, of spirituality is my relationship, examining my relationship with myself. So self-examination can enrich your recovery. And so, the 12-step program is very effective in terms of giving you structure to do self-examination. I think it's one of the reasons the 12-step program is so effective. Every one of the steps, it encourages self-examination, and that ultimately, if we're dedicated and we go into that with good intention. And again, spirituality, my relationship with myself. Am I being honest about my relationship with myself? Meaning, am I really engaging in thorough, honest self-examination, or am I keeping that at bay? And that might not, my relationship with myself is leaving something to be desired. And again, weighing that out as a spiritual element, it gives us something to think about. Third one I put here is connection, the word connection. Now, I can go deep on this in a lot of my work, and that's what I do in my coaching, is we talk a lot about connection, and I have different models that I use to illustrate man's desire for connection. I believe that we come in spiritually connected. Part of being human is we lose that connection, and I think our drug use is one attempt at trying to reclaim that connection. I do a lot of work around that. And so understanding, again, that authentic self, paying attention to myself, going within, is how we're going to do that. That self-examination, meditation, spiritual practices, that can help us feel connected. But another way, more tangible way of looking at connection is with other people. There's a lot of power or potential there of experiencing connection with other people. And that's why, the sober support network, fellowship among fellow travelers about whatever path that you're taking is, and the experience of doing this with other travelers. And so the connection that we experience in our sober support groups and our network, that is a powerful thing. And again, when you enter into engaging in that with the intention of looking at, this is valuable, this connection, this is special. Again, you hear me use the word intention a lot. By just in setting an intention to pay attention to the value of the connection, that can increase it. Just like the talking about motivation makes you more motivated, focusing on, we had connection in that meeting last night, or in my walk with my friend this morning in the woods. That was good. Or just, I was out playing hockey with guys this weekend, and there was connection. And it doesn't happen alone. So just connection with other people. And then the last thing that I'll say is I suggest look for miracles. I remember early on in sobriety, I was listening to a tape, an audio cassette tape about the Course in Miracles. And the speaker said, miracles are naturally occurring around us. And if you're not experiencing any miracles in your life, there's something wrong with you, is basically what it said. And I had no idea what that meant when I first heard that. And I can say today, a lot of years later, I do understand what she meant when she said that. If I'm not experiencing miracles, there's something wrong with me. I'm not perceiving them. It's my eyes aren't open looking for them. And you know what I found is the most powerful, or the easiest way to facilitate that? For years with the kids in my drug treatment program, up until, I'll give you an example in a second here, of just before I got on this webinar today, I had a conversation with somebody, I'll share that in a second, about, I say, look for coincidences. I would tell kids in my treatment, okay, over the next week, I want you to pay attention to coincidences and come back and tell me what kind of coincidences you've experienced. And it would never fail. They'd come back, Jim, you wouldn't believe it. We were in group yesterday. We were talking about the hawk medicine. And when I came home, guess what? There was a hawk sitting in our driveway. And they're saying it with big eyes, and they're excited and they're inspired. It was a coincidence that, we talked about hawk here, and then I saw a hawk. But when we're looking at it that way, and maybe they attach a little bit element of awe or mystery to it, and it makes, maybe there is something. We don't have to believe in God and sign up for a specific religion, but maybe there is something. Do you see what I'm saying there? And looking for coincidences, it never fails. They always see coincidences. And I think that goes back to that when I was just mentioning about intention, right? And so looking for coincidences. So here, I'll wrap up this talk today. I've got a client who I helped get into detox a couple days ago. She just texted me right before I got on here that she's leaving the detox and she's on her way to treatment right now. And I told her, right before I had this webinar, I literally had a Zoom meeting call with that treatment center that she was going to. And it had nothing to do with her. It was about another business thing. But I texted her back. I said, ironically, I'm getting on a call with that treatment center right now. She texted back because I had sent her Sobriety Doesn't Suck the week before she went to detox. I said, start reading this. And she had texted, she had said something about the coincidences that spoke to her. And then just now, when I told her, I'm having a meeting with some of the staff from that treatment center that she was going to at the time that she was going there, she texted me back and she said, remember what I said about coincidences? I read that in your book. And she noticed the coincidence. Oh, isn't that an interesting coincidence? But I will tell you that framing it that way, recognizing the coincidence, she's inspired. She's beginning this journey. She's on her way of walking into a treatment program to begin this journey to the sacred mountains. And the fact that I was on a Zoom call with the treatment center, bizarre little coincidence, I know that inspired her and gave her a little woo-woo moment of, ooh, maybe there's something. And then ironically, when I was on the call with the staff there, I was telling them, the lady that's coming to your treatment program, she just texted me. She's reading I was telling them about the book. That was one of the reasons for the call, and I had told her that. And I told her the thing about coincidences, and I said, she's coming into you sort of fired up because she just got this coincidence. And while I was saying that, a text came across my screen here, and she said, so they were transferring. She was driving from one place, and she was meeting somebody else and getting in a different vehicle. And I told the staff, she just texted me and said the transfer is complete, and she's on her way. And there was another coincidence that, and I told her, I was just talking about you when you sent me that text. And so she's in this sort of woo-woo, and I'm sort of orchestrating that. I'm encouraging her to pay attention to the coincidences and let that inspire you. And I think there's a really good chance that's a special moment for her, sort of, she looks at it as a sign or an omen. She's feeling good about walking into the treatment center because she got some affirmation from the universe is how she might be looking at it. And that's that thing, what they were talking about. Miracles are occurring all around you. If you don't notice them, that's wrong. It's, there's something wrong with you. It's identifying it as the miracle or the coincidence. I could have said, I'm on the Zoom call with them right now. And she goes, and she could do, okay, and not think anything of it. That's what they were talking about whoa, maybe there's something to this. Okay, so let's recap. We started off talking about how do we get from point A to point B. It's understandable that the notion of having to get sober for a lot of people in those early stages is this is going to suck. We're having to give up something that we don't want to have to give up. And how do we get to that point of being excited and it being a fulfilling and rewarding experience? And I suggested that it's about facilitating some type of transformation. It's not just staying dry. When we started talking about the difference between examining spirituality and one way of looking at it is the difference between going outside ourselves to change how we feel versus recognizing good feelings coming from within. That lady who's in the car on the way to the treatment center right now, she's got a good feeling. And again, that's not like exciting like 10 hits of acid, right? And when I said say to the clients, you don't know what it is. She could say that feeling that she has about, okay, I feel good about this. She might say that's better than the gallon of vodka she was drinking every day for the last whatever. And it's not as exciting, but oh yeah, once you've experienced it, yeah, you can't really put it into words. That's the inside job. I pay a lot of attention to trying to be sensitive to people who are going to be turned off by religion talk and put some effort and some time into unpacking exactly what that term spiritual or spiritual experience is used. Again, I'll remind you to check out my work on Carl Jung's contribution to Alcoholics Anonymous and his perspective on the relationship between alcohol and the desire for spiritual connection. It's a fascinating account in his view, and there's some really interesting stuff in there that can really change people's understanding of what's going on with addiction. And then finally, I believe that the ultimate, how do we motivate someone for sobriety? I'm a big believer in this idea of lighting a spark, getting a glimpse of the sacred mountains, creating something, helping them see that there's something that gets them excited about wanting more. That lady sitting in the car right now driving to the treatment center, again, that might not be the glimpse of the sacred mountains, but it could be a little bit of a spark that is inspired. You know what? This feels good. This feels better than that vodka induced whatever I've been in. And this good feeling, I like that and I want more of that, and maybe I really could develop and grow. And again, it's that spark. I believe that it's valuable to work to try to help clients if we're treatment professionals, or if we're just working on our own sobriety through sober support. The idea is, how do we find something good? We're replacing something, we're giving something up. And so, yes, understandable to feel bad. There can be good things. And so as treatment professionals, we want to dedicate our work to helping, be sensitive to how do we help them feel good. And then here's an interesting thought. Maybe a lot of people already do that, but you've heard me say a bunch of times today, identifying that that's what's going on actually enhances the motivation. Do you see what we're doing here? And do you see how that's motivated? By reviewing their motivation process ends up being even more motivating, or as my client the other day said, it's actually spiritual experience territory for him. This is sort of cool. What's happening for me? I'm liking feeling better than my 24/7 use of cannabis. This is what he was coming off of. And the good feeling ends up being the most motivating thing for keeping us coming back for more. So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I think I can, I put a link in here you can download the Sobriety Doesn't Have to Suck ebook there. I just put that in the chat. And so you can get that. I'm going to give you another email to my to my Substack. Or maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Hold on a second. And if you have any questions while I'm trying to copy this link out of the browser, type any questions. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Let me know who's there listening to me. I'm not looking at you right now. I'm going to be back looking at you in a second here. Does anybody have any questions? I appreciate you being here. Here's the URL to my Substack. There's lots of articles. I opened that about 3-4 weeks ago, and I'm writing about all this stuff. The name of the Substack is Sobriety Doesn't Suck. So if there aren't any questions, I'm going to wrap this up, because I don't want to cut us off before anybody gets back to your keyboard and wants to make any kind of comments. If not, I'm going to say thank you so much for being here. And if you have any other questions about what I do, find out how I might be able to help you, please feel free to reach out for me. My website is jimsavage.net. That's easy to find. You can always schedule a free consultation with me to talk about. Luigi is there. All right. I was wondering if you were there, Luigi. Anyway, as I was saying, if you have any questions, if you'd like to find out more about working with me, you can go to my website, jimsavage.net. You can schedule a free consultation there, or you could learn also about the family program that I run. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks again so much for being here, guys. Peace out. Bye.